Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Dynamite program that the Los Angeles Public Library is putting on for you live. Today is a kickoff pre-program to this Saturday's Los Angeles Libros Festival. And the LA Libros Festival, that's a mouthful, is a free bilingual book festival for the whole family. So you can check our website for all the events we have planned to live stream on this upcoming Saturday between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. And so this is one of the first. This is a pre-program kickoff. It's about searching for your indigenous roots in Mexico. I'm the Los Angeles Public Library's genealogy librarian, and I am very happy to bring back to our presentation stage a fellow who has done presentations for us before, and you're in for a real treat. Now, let me tell you before we get started, this presentation is going to be taped or recorded, so you'll be able to watch it at least for a little while after today on our website, going to the same links you've gone to today for YouTube and Facebook. So if you want to rewatch and take notes at that time so you can stop and start, just go to the same YouTube or the same Facebook link after this presentation, and you'll be able to see it again. Also, I'm going to be monitoring questions in the chat boxes on both YouTube and Facebook. So if you have a question as you're watching the presentation, type it up, and I will ask it of John at the very end, so we can kind of, he can be in his moment giving the presentation, and at the end we'll have all the questions ready to go. So let me introduce our speaker. John Schmal is an expert on researching Mexico, as you're soon going to discover. He is a historian, genealogist, and lecturer. He has degrees in history from Loyola Marymount and geography from St. Cloud State University. He is also a board member of the Society of Hispanic Historical Ancestral Research. So without further ado, I will introduce John, and he will talk about our indigenous roots in Mexico.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Julie. I guess I'll get started right now. This is called Searching for Your Indigenous Roots in Mexico. It's going to get pretty complex. I've been wanting to create this presentation for several years, so I hope I get across my main points. In 1519, Cortez arrived in Mexico and they conquered the Aztec Empire in 1521. And about 200 languages were spoken throughout Mexico at that time. Right here, you see a map of where all those languages were, because of course, indigenous people live in every part of Mexico. Now, in the early 21st century, the 2000s, you see a map of where the languages are and spoken in Mexico. And of course, you see a map where, languages are spoken in disparate regions of the country, the majority of which are in southern and eastern sections of the nation. And the great loss of language speakers was the result of conquest, war, epidemics, and assimilation. I'm going to get a lot into the assimilation aspect as we go along here. Now, what am I looking for? I know a lot of people get their DNA results and they're really excited when they see that they have 20 or 50% Native American ancestry. So people who get their DNA results are pleased to have firm evidence that they do, in fact, descend from the indigenous people of Mexico. But where do you go now? What do you do next to prove it? The answer is that you need to develop a paper trail. You do this by tracing your lineage to find exactly who these ancestors were. These ancestors, these Indian ancestors, will remain nameless until you track them down. It also doesn't hurt, of course, for you to contact some of your DNA matches to see if they have made some progress in tracking down their ancestry. So sharing documents can be very helpful. Location analysis is the first step. The first goal of researching your roots is to find out where your ancestors came from, the municipio, the town, the hacienda, or whatever. The most important method for tracking and compiling your Indian ancestries is to meticulously trace every branch of your family as far back as possible. I'll be talking about that as we go along. Your next step would be to learn what tribal or linguistic groups occupied that specific area where your ancestors live. This is actually more complex than people think it is. Now, there are a wide variety of historical books that can be consulted with regards to the location of the original ethnic groups for specific regions of Mexico. And in the handouts, you'll see some links to bookstores and whatnot that may be helpful. And remember, a lot of your sources may be in Spanish, not English. The following website that I'm showing on the screen here is the Indigenous Mexico website, articles by state, that you can go to. And at the end of some of my histories, my articles, you can find bibliographies that mention some of those useful histories. Oh, and also, in addition to having articles, there are also presentations like this one for the Indigenous people of particular states. So you can also go to that because I include maps that may be helpful. Now, this I regard as the best source. The historical geographies written by Peter Gerhard talk about every colonial Spanish jurisdiction of Mexico from top to bottom. The Indian groups that inhabited each region are discussed. In addition, the date of Spanish settlements or the migration of other indigenous groups into the area are mentioned. And so one is called the Guide to the Historical Geography of New Spain. So that's mainly northern and eastern Mexico. Then there's the north frontier of New Spain. That's Nueva Galicia, Nueva Vizcaya, Chihuahua, Sonora, Nueva León, and Tamaulipas. It's the north. And then you have the southeast frontier of New Spain, which is the southern states you see listed there. And I really, really recommend that. And here's a map from the historical geography of New Spain showing the different linguistic groups. So it's an example that I thought I'd show you. But he has other maps similar to this. This is one of the maps for Nueva Galicia, but he has multiple maps that you'll want to explore. If you can get a hold of this book, it's probably on sale on Amazon.com, and they have it at some of the libraries, sometimes for reference, sometimes for checkout. And then, of course, there's my website, Indigenous Mexico. And I want you to remember, when people think Mexico, they think Aztec or Mayan. The Aztec Empire only ruled over 8 of the current 32 states of Mexico today. And the Mayans inhabited roughly 5 states. So there are a lot of other stories to tell about a lot of other indigenous groups, and you're likely to be descended from some of those other ones. So when people think Mexico, they think Aztecs. They say, I want to find my Aztec roots. Actually, it may not be Aztecs, although I think Aztecs do come into every part of Mexico. But that's a longer story that I'll be telling coming up. And here's the articles by state link. But there's also a genealogy link where you'll find this one, this particular presentation. For those of you who have Northern Sonora roots, I want to recommend the Mission 2000 database. You see the link right here. And as an example, we have an Jose M. Carmona, who died in 1797. He was actually killed by Apaches, and it gives information about him. And then you have a girl who's just named Maria, who was also an Apache Indian, and she was a servant, and she died in the 1748 epidemic. These are the kind of membership, the information they have for baptisms, marriage, and burials from the 1600s to the 1800s. So if you have Northern Sonora roots, I'd like to check this out. Okay, our complex roots. This table is to try and stimulate your imagination. Because if you're trying to determine the tribe from which you descend, the answer may be more complex than just finding one tribe in one location. It may involve a lot of potential tribes. Each and every one of us has 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and 16 great-grandparents, 2 great. 14 generations ago, around maybe 1540, 1560, you had 16,384 12th great grandparents. And many of them may be indigenous or Portuguese or Spanish or French or Sephardic. So I just want to give you an impression of how many people you're actually descended from when you go back that far. And we are all descended from the same amount, 16,384 people, 14 generations back. So it's kind of interesting to picture that. Mestizaje and social transformation. According to Oxford Dictionary, mestizaje is described as the interbreeding and cultural intermixing of Spanish colonists and American Indian people in Mexico. It started in the early 16th century and continued on through colonial Mexico to independence. When the Spaniards arrived in some areas, in many areas actually, a social transformation took place. The Spaniards, with their superior military tactics, easily overwhelmed most of the tribes that resisted them, and some resisted, others made peace very quickly. The loss of life from disease or war caused a social chaos among some of the indigenous groups, and so did epidemic disease. In some cases, epidemic disease caused more social chaos. But in other areas, the indigenous people accepted the rule of the Spaniards, and a peaceful process of assimilation resulted. And during the 17th century, intermarriage between various indigenous groups became very common, especially when they were living in the missions with a lot of other groups. So this mestizaje, this interbreeding between Spaniards and indigenous people or between multiple indigenous people may have obscured your descent from one particular ethnic group. So I'm going to talk about the loss of tribal identity. The processes that took place from one region to another were different, but as indigenous people moved to new regions, they stopped speaking their native languages and began to speak only Spanish. In this process, many of them lost their tribal identity early on because they were living in a whole different place. The existing social structures disintegrated, especially because of epidemic disease too, and they blended into the more dominant Indian groups or assimilated into the central Hispanic culture. I'll be discussing one example of that shortly. The pre-Hispanic cultural link that was handed down from parents to children was more or less severed, and only Spanish and the Aztec language of Nahuatl was spoken. So as converted Christians, they didn't retain their old culture, and of course they were assuming Christian given names and Spanish surnames. So the theory of multi-tribal descent means many people searching for their Mexican ancestors seek to find out the name of a given tribe that inhabited the Spanish jurisdiction where their ancestors lived. But no matter where your ancestors came from, it's likely that you're descended from multiple tribal groups. You may descend from the autochthonous people, I don't know if I said that right, who are native to that specific region. For example, if your family came from Sayin Alto Zacatecas, your ancestors are most likely Zacatecos Indians. If your ancestors came from the area around León, Guanajuato, your indigenous ancestors may be Guamaras, Guachichiles, and Tarascans. And then there's the effect of widespread migration, which brought new people into the region, Tlaxcalans, Tarascans, Basques, etc. And I'll be discussing an example of that shortly. The family search process, I do recommend that you go into this. And I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I illustrated it because some people, especially during this pandemic period, are having difficulty getting into it. So I'm assuming most of you already know about it, but I have these pages here to kind of give you an example because it's a little bit tricky. but I'm not going to discuss it right here. Okay, I'm going to go into racial classifications. As probably most of you know, Mexico is a layered society with distinct social classes. The Peninsulares, people born in Spain, were at the top. Creoles or Criollos were people of European descent, but they were born in Mexico. And then you have mestizos and mulattoes, who are mixed individuals, Indian, Spanish, French perhaps, Portuguese, and African slaves or former African. The Africans had incentive for marrying into Indian families because their children would be free. And of course, at the bottom, you had the Native Americans, unfortunately, who were called the Indios, and the esclavos, who were slaves. And so here you see the racial classifications in colonial Mexico. And I show Español, Indio, Negro, Mulatto, Mestizo. But I want to stress that they did not use these classifications after 1821. So that kind of complicates your search. I'll be talking more about this later in the presentation. So those racial classifications go up to 1821, and you rarely see them after that, at least in church records. Okay, let's look at some actual records of Indigenous people in Mexico. Right here, the marriages of Indigenous people. Most church records, Catholic church records, for Indigenous Mexico in Mexico's colonial period refer to them by the generic term of indio or India. Shown below, you see a record for two Indians getting married in Lagos de Moreno, Jalisco in 1773. On the side, in the margin, and this is a good place to look first, but usually you also have to look in the body of the document. But it says Jose Dionisio Delgado Indio married Rita Quiteria de Lara in India. It doesn't tell you what kind of Indian they are. And unfortunately, you're going to find this in most of Mexico, even in places like Oaxaca. It might just call them an Indio or Indian. Not everywhere, but most places. But it's important for you to trace every branch of your family, whether it says they're Espanol or mulattoes or mestizos or whatever, because you never know for sure. When you see this document right here, this is a 1744 marriage of the parents of the bride from the 1773 marriage we saw on the previous page. And note that although Rita Quiteria de Lara was classified as an Indian on the previous page, both of her parents here are called mulattos libros, or free mulattoes. Carlos Antonio, without a surname, is a mulatto libre de Carenta. I guess maybe it's saying the place he's from is Carenta, with Maria de la Encarnacion Valadez. She does have a surname, and she's a mulatto libre from another place. And casados, it means they're married. So you have an Indian whose parents were both mulattos libres. How does that make sense? It just means that the priests sometimes are basing the classifications on their own biases. So you have to be careful, and you have to go from generation to generation. And most colonial designations, you see that the vast majority of Indians are referred to by Indio or India coming from a particular place. If you look at these three documents that we have on this page, you have one where you say an Indian child, Indio Parvulo, from a city in Michoacan. And then if you look at the right side, you see a baptism, and this is in the margin, of a Diego de los Santos of San Balthazar of this doctrine, which means this Catholic parish in this case. And then at the bottom, you see a Mateo Antonio, who's an Indian from San Pedro. This is from Morelos, Mexico. So they're not giving names of Indians here either, because a lot of these Indians were actually assimilated into the Central Hispanic culture, maybe 100 or 200 years earlier. Their great grandparents were. More examples right here On the left side, you can see Catarina Mecora and India de Tepoztlan. So she's from a city in Guerrero. And on the right side, you see the married Salvador Juan, a single Indian, and Gregoria Andrea, an Indian maiden from Atzalan, Veracruz. And so, as you can see, I went through quite a few states and did not find a name of an Indian tribe. And then you're going to have a point, and this is 1694 here, this document from Lagos de Moreno, Jalisco, where you have a Balthazar Leonicio, an Indian, marrying Pascuala de Petapia, also an Indian. As you can see, the man does not have a surname, the woman does. And so it gets more difficult to trace Indian lineages from this point on. It's not impossible, but it does get difficult. But then in some places you have classification of linguistic groups. In some states like Sonora, Chihuahua, Coahuila, you're going to find church records occasionally reference a specific kind of Indian tribe. It's great when you find these. This 1817 baptism from Mocorito, Sonora, shows the baptism of an Yaqui child. So it shows his children, and it says his parents are Yaquis, and it calls him an Indio Yaqui. But also be aware that some Indians moved around. They sought employment in regions outside of their native lands, such as Altada, northern Sonora, which is where this record is from. Hence, you can find these 1789 records right here, where you see the baptism of a Pima Indian, an Opata Indian, and a Yaqui Indian side by side. And this is some distance from their traditional homelands in Sonora. Pima Indians live near here. Opata Indians live more to the east, and the Yaquis lived somewhere to the south. Obviously, their parents came to Altada to work, but that doesn't mean that their native homeland is here. So it's a little bit disruptive. You have to remember, this means this Yaqui child, for example, he's born here, but his parents are probably from southern Sonora, where the Yaquis were living, or at least his grandparents were. And here's another example. This February 1749 marriage of two Yaqui Indians in the city of Chihuahua is evidence that indigenous people moved to seek employment in magnet regions that would provide them with the work and sustenance to feed their family. So the native home of the Yaquis in Sonora was some 300 miles west of the city of Chihuahua, but that's where this record is from. Yaquis don't live anywhere near the city of Chihuahua. So that's something to be a little bit aware of. Now, I want to use one example here. The Chichimeca nations, a lot of you have probably seen this. The Gran Chichimeca was the area the Spaniards referred to all these tribal groups. They were given the umbrella term Chichimeca, but it was actually many different groups. And you see in the legend there, you see all the tribal groups. Huachachili, Zacatecas, Pames, Otomi. And so I wanted to point that out because the assimilation of these Indians was an example of what happened in many places of Mexico. There was a Chichimeca War from 1550 to 1590 between the Spaniards and these Chichimeca tribes, or some of them. It ended in a peace agreement in 1590 that brought peaceful, sedentary, Christianized Indians from other parts of Mexico into the region. The so-called civilized Indians were given the task of helping their Indian brethren to adapt to the new Christian way of life under Spanish tutelage. These Indian groups, Tlaxcalans, the Mexica, the Otomi, the Patapecha, among others, had all undergone the same experience a few decades earlier. This peace offensive and the missionary efforts that went with it were so successful that within a few years, the Zacatecos and Huachichiles had settled down to peaceful living within the small settlements and now dotted the whole region. They rapidly assimilated, and the historian Philip Wayne Powell writes, the 16th century land of war was thus became fully Mexican in its mixture. This was carried out with other Indian groups in other parts of Mexico, such as the Coahuiltecans in northeastern Mexico. And some indigenous groups, of course, didn't assimilate, and they stayed isolated, like the Tarahumara, the Cholas. And of course, their languages survive to this day as a result. And I talk about them in a lot of the other presentations on the website. So if you're interested in them, you can check that out. Now, the Tlaxcalans had a big alliance with the Spaniards because they teamed up with Cortez to defeat the Aztecs. They had what evolved into a stable, institutionalized pact. And they played a big role in all these indigenous groups going to all these towns in the north and settling alongside the other indigenous people. So they established numerous settlements on the northern frontier, which served as military outposts, sites for agricultural and infrastructural development, and centers for civilizing and Christianizing northern Indians. They served as soldiers, colonists, and emissaries of Christianity and civilization, and they guarded their autonomy very jealously. And this is a really good example of what I talked about with the Chichimecas, who occupied a great deal of western San Luis Potosi. Laurent Corbel wrote The Motions Beneath. And from 1591 to 1630, Corbel talked about the indigenous people that went into the city of Tlaxcalila in San Luis Potosi from 1594 to 1630. Corbel said that they came from 130 communities far and wide across Mexico. And right here you see this list of the different groups. Some were just called Indios, some called themselves Chichimecas, some called themselves Tlaxcalans or Otomis or Tarascans. Now just think, this is one town, San Luis Potosi, but this undoubtedly happened throughout most of northern Mexico, Chihuahua, Coahuila, Zacatecas, Aguas Calientes. So I just want to stress that. And this is one example of how it happened in one town. And here's an example of Tlaxcalan records in Coahuila. The Tlaxcalans settled San Esteban del Saltillo de la Nueva Tlaxcala, which is now in Coahuila, and they had their own church. Right here, you have a marriage between two Indios Tlaxcotecos from the Barrio of Concepcion. They baptized their son Juan right here, and you see really a nice record. If you happen to be descended from these people, you're going to be very pleased. Records in post-colonial Mexico. Okay, how do I find indigenous ancestors after 1821 if the church records aren't showing racial classification? Well, after 1821, the Mexican government didn't permit the churches to do that. I came across a record in 1840 where it said that the great-great-great-grandfather of my brother-in-law was an Indio, but they weren't supposed to do that. So for the most part, they didn't do it. And so you probably will not find any racial classifications at all. Mexico started civil registration in 1859 and phased it in over the next 3 decades, but those records don't claim racial classifications for the first few decades either. Although in some very indigenous communities, I think you will see in the margins sometimes they'll say Indigena, if your people actually lived in an Indigena community. But it's really hard to find. So, maybe you will have that asset, but, it is hard to find. Now, 1921, right after the Mexican Revolution, Mexico instituted 3 racial classifications in their civil registration. The churches did not. And so in the 1921 census, you have Indígena pura, pure indigenous people. There are over 4 million. They made up almost 1/3 of the population of Mexico. Then you had Indígena mezclada con blanca. That's indigenous mixed with white, 8.5 million people. Almost 60% of the people were classified that way. And then blanca for white. That would be Spanish, German, French, whatever. And they made up less than 1/10 of the percentage. And then you had, of course, foreigners, extranjeros, or people that refused to answer. So you also, in addition to having this in 1921 census, they start using it in civil record. So right here, we're looking at civil record from Compostela in Nayarit, 1927, and from Canelas, Durango in 1925. And they use those terms. So in the margin here of the document, it says raza, indígena con blanca, mezclada. So they're actually classifying them and they're showing it in the margins. But don't expect them always to be showing it in the margin. Right here, you see a record where it gives a person's name, Carrillo, and it says he's Mexicano because they were proud of the fact that they were Mexican citizens now. And it said he was mezclada. And then for the bottom record, in a 1929 record from Cucatlán, Oaxaca, the birth or nacimiento of the citizen Serapio Cruz, he's announcing the birth of his child. And so he was a native and resident of this place, and he was of the nationality Mexican, and through birth of the race Indígena pura. So he's pure indigenous. It doesn't say what tribe he's from, but it says he's pure indigenous. So from 1921 into the 1950s, you actually do have this, at least in some civil record. I don't think you have it in all of them. So that's the important thing to remember. Now, the bottom line. The bottom line of tracing your indigenous roots in Mexico is to trace all your branches of your family tree. If you come across mulattoes or Españolas, don't give up on that line. Keep going up that line because you may find Indians a generation or 2 or 3 later. So do the best you can to trace all the lineages. But from 1821 to 1921, the Mexican Catholic Church record and Mexican civil records did not assign racial categories. Therefore, you need to trace your ancestral lines back to 1821 before you would find a classification of indio or Indian. And even if you have an ancestor classified as Espanol, that person may in fact have mixed origins that could include Indian ancestors, so I encourage you to go forward on that. And that's the end of my lecture. So we'll look for questions. I'll go back up to the first page of the presentation.
All right. Thank you, John. I do have a couple of questions here that came in. One, where can people find that complex roots graphic that you showed early in the presentation? It was kind of about how many ancestors we have as of 1520 or whatever.
That's actually in several of my presentations because I really enjoy showing it to people. But if you go to the Indigenous Mexico link, indigenousmexico.org, and go to the genealogy link on the right side, I think this presentation is the first presentation, and you could find it there. But I've posted it on a few other places and put it in a few presentations and on Facebook. So
yeah, you can rewatch this presentation and maybe do a screenshot of it as well.
it is interesting, isn't it?
I know, 16,384.
And it's for each of us. No one is exempt.
Oh boy. And then someone was having a little trouble getting your handout, but we put up a good link for that, I think. But is your contact information on the handout? I can't remember.
I guess not. but you know my email, johnnypj@aol.com.
Okay, and if you didn't hear that, you can always email me, and my email address is there, and I can maybe forward it to them if that's okay.
Okay.
And then I just wanted to let everybody know some of the books that you mentioned in your presentation, like the Peter Gerhard books, the library has. So if you want to just kind of take a look at some of those to see what he's talking about, because it sounds like fascinating history. They're in our history department. Several of them are reference books, so you have to wait until the library reopens to the public to see them, but a couple are circulating. So you could request to have them sent to a branch near you. So you could just search by keywords, author, title, that sort of thing at lapl.org. Any other questions out there? Let's see. Susie says, I found my mother's family in the 1930s census for Puebla, but have not been able to find her father's family in the 1930s census for Yucatan. Any ideas why?
Well, I know that if they have common surnames, you may have some trouble. And I've had this problem happen with a lot of people. My recommendation is you try to get on to search the actual Puebla records. I did a presentation about Puebla, which you'll see in my Indigenous Mexico website. And I love the Indigenous history of Puebla. It's so complex with so many Indigenous groups, and it played a part of a role in the defeat of the Aztec Indians because the Tlaxcalans were right nestled close by. But I recommend you to, if you haven't searched the church records yet for a place in Puebla, you should probably go into this family search process. And in fact, I even show Puebla here. If you choose the state of Puebla, when you go in here to this website, you go to the map, you press on the map, and it gives you 34 collections. No, 34, I think it is. Actually, it's more than that. But and then if you choose Puebla, how convenient, huh? You'll come to a page called Index Historical Records. And you might want to go, if you're looking for your ancestors in 1930s, 20s, 1910s, I recommend you search both Catholic and civil records. And I've seen pretty good Puebla records. So right here, I show you how to go to the Catholic Church records. And then when you go into this Puebla thing here, you have to
Are
go
you
to the
are
very
you doing
bottom.
it, John? Are you doing it right now on your
Oh, you aren't
screen?
seeing it?
Let's share that if we can.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, good. Here we go.
Okay, I'll spend about 4 minutes on this. The family search process right here. You go to family search and you go to this map. And you can come back to these pages to go through them more carefully. And so if you choose the state of Puebla, you'll come to indexed historical records. And so I have an arrow pointing to the Catholic Church records, but you would also be interested in civil registration. And once you go into the Catholic Church records, you're going to want to access all the Puebla Catholic Church records section. Right now, you can do a search on here if you want to. But my recommendation is you go to the very bottom page and browse through the 6 million images. And you'll see all these cities from Puebla come up, and then you go into each one for your own digital records. And that could be a whole presentation of its own. So I can't go into that much detail, but I give you instruction on how to get to it. And right here is a page showing the Puebla Catholic Church records. Actually, it only shows some of them. The page was too big for me to illustrate all of them. And then I showed an example here, the film listings for, I think this was the city of Puebla. And the really beautiful thing is you go in here and you'll see an index of baptisms, deaths, and matrimonials, 1912, 1916. And on the very right side, you see a magnifying glass. If this is Catholic Church record, and you see that magnifying glass, that means you can search that individual microfilm for your name, Jose Martinez or Jose Segura or whatever. And then the actual record, digitized copies, are in that little camera. So each of you needs to go into these on your own and get comfortable with it. I'd like to walk you through it, but I would take an entire presentation. But that's why I included these 4 pages, because I wanted to give you an idea of how to get there. But each person has to figure their own way to do it. But it's a very, very exciting. If you've never seen this before, you're going to be really overwhelmed. And I love Puebla. And I hope you look at my presentation and my article about Puebla. All you have to do is go to the articles by state section. But this is something I encourage you to do because Puebla has a very rich history. And right here, you see how the website can be searched by articles by state. And there's a Puebla link, which I think includes several articles because I also have an article about the Nahuatl languages. And so you might find several articles posted there, but there's also a presentation. And I enjoyed putting together the presentation on Puebla so much that I'd be honored if you'd go to check it out. But I do have another link called the genealogy link, which I just put up a week ago, so you don't see it here. And that's where you can find this presentation.
John, she was wondering too, do you happen to know, is there something with Yucatan in particular that like were there, do you know if any of their records were destroyed, or is it, because she was saying she has had some success with Puebla, but Yucatan was the state that was problematic for her.
You know, I went into the Yucatan lately. Now it's a pretty small state. I don't remember any civil records for Yucatan at all, because I think I looked to find some. But there are Catholic Church records, and you would take the same link in FamilySearch to go to the Yucatan. As I said before, you press the map of Mexico, and then you have a choice of all these states, and you go to the state of Yucatan. And it may not show civil registration, but it will show Catholic Church records because I looked at them just lately. And remember, Yucatan used to be much bigger because Quintana Roo was part of it, and the other state, Campeche. So Yucatan was actually a bigger state at one time. I actually have a presentation talks about Yucatan also. Or no, an article, and Yucatan has a pretty fascinating history. But yes, Catholic Church or Yucatan you could find using the same link. Civil records, I'm not too sure about that.
And Marisol is saying she doesn't have birth certificates for her grandparents to learn about their parents. And she's wondering if you have any recommendations on how she should proceed in searching for their parents.
And where did the parents live or live?
Let me just see if Marisol responds to that. I too have been having some trouble. Whenever I do research in Mexico, I usually have to ask the people if they know older relations, like, because I usually start with the 1930 census and then go backwards. Are there more modern resources that help, like people born in the 40s or 50s? Or
I think the civil records in many cases go up to the 1950s, but in a lot of states they only go to 1930. Like in most of Jalisco, I think they go up to 1930. So there are some limitations, but Ancestry.com, and I don't know if people can access Ancestry.com through LAPL at home.
They can right now.
Oh, they can.
If you have a library card.
They go and search on Ancestry.com through LAPL or get a subscription, which is likely to cost you $100 or $200. But if they can use Los Angeles Public Library, because Ancestry.com is really good with civil records. 4 or 5 years ago, if anybody was of Mexican descent and they asked me, can I go to Ancestry to get my Mexican records? I would have said no. But now they have a pretty good system, so I'd recommend you to go there. Just remember to change the collection to Mexico, because if you search from the LAPL, it's probably going to default to the U.S. collection.
It's world. It's world.
Oh, okay. Well, then try and limit it just to Mexico so you don't get U.S. records as well. You can search my collection.
Fabulous. Marisol is saying that the people whose birth certificates they were from Jalisco and Michoacan.
Yeah, the Michoacan and Jalisco records are probably the two states I've searched more than anybody. They have beautiful records. I only know of one town from Jalisco that is missing. So I would say use the same link, FamilySearch, go into the Mexico link, then go to Jalisco and search for either Catholic Church or civil registration. The civil registration is likely only 1930. The Catholic Church record can have a lot of coverage for some parishes, not for others. But I love Jalisco records. They're about the best in the world, in my opinion. They rarely disappoint. And they always show abuelos in the church records back to about 1800. Michoacan does not show abuelos in the old church records. So it's a little bit trickier. They were in a different archdiocese. The Jalisco, the Guadalajara diocese, if you're really interested in Jalisco and Michoacan, there's another presentation under the genealogy link that I just did a few days ago, and it's called Explorations in Mexican Genealogy, and it goes more into the details of going into these different places. And there's a Guadalajara dispensas and a Michoacan link for dispensas. There's a lot to learn, and what I encourage you to do is go to FamilySearch or Ancestry.com and start doing the searches. And you can email me if you have a specific question or two next few days or a couple of weeks. But if you haven't done it, you've got a really fun experience in front of you. I have to admit, I'm jealous.
And some of those, as I've noticed through looking through some of these records, they're handwritten and they're kind of hard to read. Are there any places that you can go for help in deciphering some of these handwritten records? Or
at the very end of the presentation that I just mentioned, which will probably be the second one after this one that's listed at the genealogy website. On that, at the very end, I showed a website which has a university, the Brigham University book called Spanish Extractions Handout, and handbook. And it discusses. It shows a link to two places for abbreviations, and that will help you probably better than anything else.
Great.
Oh, and by the way, I want to stress for that person whose Aunt Marisol, whose family came from Jalisco and Michoacan, just remember that when you go into the Jalisco Catholic Church records, then you go to this page where you can search on names. Remember to go to the very bottom of the page and look for the word browse. And this is true for any state. Go down to that bottom one, because I don't think you're going to find it anywhere but the bottom, unless they've changed it in the last week. And that is where you will go into this thing for Jalisco, and it'll show all the Catholic Church record for all these towns. It's amazing. And then you can pick the town where your family came from. And I only know of one town that's near Jalos Totitlan, a neighboring town, that they don't have. Everything else that I know of, they have. And they have some records, like the Guadalajara church records go back to 1599. So it's really amazing. It's a journey that you'll love if you can just get through these steps here, which can be kind of confusing.
Yeah, and this FamilySearch link that John's been talking about, which is just wonderful, is free for everyone to access from home. at FamilySearch.org. You just have to create a free username and password, and then you can have access to many of the records. Some of the records you need to be at family history libraries to access, but you can access most of the, I think all of the Catholic Mexico records from home. I've never had a problem.
I do have to say one thing about that. I've always recommended people go to FamilySearch catalog, then search there, and you can see the availability of records. But I went to Nochislan Zacatecas catalog, in the catalog, about a week ago, and I actually went in and it didn't have the microfilm records for me to access. So I had to go back and go to the FamilySearch search and use this 4-page process that I have here to find the actual records. So beware, the catalog is good to check and good to find out the availability of records. And it's probably going to show you the digital record, but there's a chance it may not. And don't get frustrated if that's the case. Then go here. Now, I did hear that some people have had problems with FamilySearch for the last few days or about a week ago. I don't know if that's still a problem. I know I had access a couple of times accessing records, but don't give up. Go back later that day or the next day or the next week.
Yeah, they're always adding their newly digitized and indexed records to FamilySearch. So if I don't see something, I'll come back in a month and try again.
Right.
Also with Ancestry.com, now is the time for those of you who haven't tried it. If you have a library card, you can access it from our website in the databases, the research databases area, and you can access it from home. And if you don't yet have a library card, you can get one now. Just go to our homepage at lapl.org, and you can sign up for one if you are a resident of Los Angeles. So this is the time to experiment, that's for sure. And John, we've got one more question here. Do you have any resources if we're interested or free?
You blacked out? Can't hear?
Do you resources?
Say that again.
Do you have any, if we're interested in about?
Your voice is blocking out again.
Okay.
I can hear you now. Try and say it now.
She wants to know about the cultures and history of the indigenous groups. Do you have any resources to learn more about that?
Yeah, Indigenous Mexico. I go into a great deal of detail here. Guerrero, for example, is a very interesting and fast. I'm actually doing a presentation on Guerrero, but it's not posted yet. But there is an article about it. There's a lot of discussion about the Nahuatl people, which you'll find on Guerrero and Puebla. So I would recommend you go to this website, and you can go to the genealogy website. But I also posted something on the census, 1921 census that did racial classifications. And as for articles by state, like if you go to Aguas Calientes here, I actually have like 8 different things posted for it. In Baja California, I have, I think, 1 or 2. Jalisco, I have a great deal of stuff because anybody who knows me knows I play favorites with Jalisco and Zacatecas. But yeah, I recommend you go here because to me, there's a lot to be told about all these individual states. Even a state like Hidalgo, which is fairly small, and I don't think I've only met one person from there. There are different indigenous groups. And of course, these state boundaries did not exist in the 1500s. So some of these tribes crossed over state boundaries, like Guanajuato, you had the Otomi Indians in Guanajuato and in Querétaro, as well as parts of Hidalgo and Puebla. So there's a very complex history, and I try to lay it out here. But the bibliographies in my histories that you see, they give you sources to go to for more information than what I'm providing.
Okay, let me see. I was just answering one question here. Okay, well, Are there any other questions out there? I know that presentation was really packed with great information. And so I encourage everybody to come back to the same links that you use to access this on Facebook or YouTube. Maybe give it a day or two, but you can see this presentation again, and then you can pause it and really absorb the information, because it was loaded. Thank you so much, John. And everybody, I encourage you to check in on Saturday to the rest of our LA Libros events. We've got a full day of really great stuff. So check in. And John, as always, excellent presentation. We love having you here, and I hope you'll come back again soon. He's also, by the way, an expert in German genealogy. So
I'm doing a German presentation later October. But you know what I really like doing is I'm really intrigued by the Mexican census. 1895, the first national one, 1921, the racial classifications. And I do a lot of tables about it. If you go to the census link on indigenousmexico.org, you'll see some of the stuff now. Like right now in the Mexican census, they ask people if they're Afro-Mestizo descent, indigenous. And so, you know, they ask various questions, but the whole census from 1895 to the 2015 tells a story. So check out that link, but I wouldn't mind doing a presentation on that maybe next year.
Oh, that sounds dynamite. Yeah, we have a lot of genealogy programs, and we've got a monthly program every third Saturday called Genealogy Garage. So we cover different topics, and so maybe we'll get you next year for that one. Next month, we're going to be dealing with how to think like an archivist. We're having a couple of our rare books librarians coming in, and they're going to talk about how to preserve some of the things you found along the way, searching for your ancestors. So that's always the third Saturday of the month. So just check lapl.org for the details. And John, I think I'll let you go. I'm sure you have a lot to do.
I wanted to give a plug for two of my articles. Two of my presentations. Okay. On the Indigenous Mexico link, there's a link called Politics. And I did a presentation on the Mexican Revolution, which kind of simplifies it for the average American, because so many things happen. There's so many names. And I put it in about 30-something pages. And I'm sort of proud because most of us Americans don't understand the whole complex story. And I try to relate it in the English language. And then I did another one on the Aztec Empire, which you can go to the Mexico City. And I talked about the Aztecs, the beginning of the Aztec Empire, a little bit about the culture, conquest, and then I talk about the Nahuatl language coming up to the present day. So it's not just a talk about the Aztec Empire, but what happened to it later, because the culture is alive and well, the language over many people speak it in Mexico. So it's obviously not a dead language.
Fantastic. That sounds really interesting. Okay, well, thanks everybody, and check back if you want to rewatch the program, but hang in there, be safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you. Bye-bye.